The Second Crusade, which occurred between 1147 and 1150, was a major military expedition. Its aim was to regain lost territories and protect Christian rule in the East. This crusade was triggered by the fall of the county of Edessa in 1144 to the forces of Zengi, a powerful Muslim leader. It was a shocking loss for the Crusader states. The county of Edessa was the first Crusader state founded after the First Crusade, but also the first to collapse, signaling a major threat to Christian territories. Pope Eugene III declared the Second Crusade as a response to this crisis. His goal was to unite Christian forces from Europe to aid the East. Two prominent leaders, Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany, agreed to lead their armies. Both faced challenges as they organized their forces. The crusade was supported by church leaders like Bernard of Clairvaux, whose speeches inspired many to join the mission. However, support was not universal. While the First Crusade had been a success in capturing Jerusalem, the Second Crusade faced greater difficulties. Internal conflicts weakened European unity. Zengi's growing power in the East worried many Christian leaders. His military successes inspired other Muslim rulers to challenge Crusader states. By the time Louis and Conrad reached Jerusalem in 1148, their armies were smaller and morale was low. The Crusade's most significant campaign would be a failure. In the West, the Crusade achieved some success, especially during the Reconquista in Iberia, where Lisbon was captured. These victories contrasted sharply with the failed attack on Damascus in the East, where Crusader forces were defeated. The Second Crusade had a significant impact on Europe and the Holy Land, setting the stage for future conflicts. After the First Crusade, Christian forces established four Crusader states in the East. These were the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, and the counties of Edessa and Tripoli. These states were designed to secure Christian control over territories conquered during the First Crusade. Among them, Edessa was the first to be established in 1098. Despite being the earliest Crusader state, Edessa was also the most vulnerable. It had a small population and faced attacks from Muslim neighbors like the Seljuks and Artukids. In its early years, Edessa was ruled by Baldwin I, who later became the King of Jerusalem. Baldwin expanded the state, but could not eliminate constant threats. By the early 12th century, the rulers of Edessa often relied on fragile alliances to defend their land. These alliances were with both local Christians and neighboring Muslim leaders. However, these agreements were temporary and unreliable. By the 1140s, Edessa's defenses weakened as its rulers faced internal disputes and external pressures. Zengi, a powerful Muslim leader, became a major threat to the Crusader states during this period. He gained control of Aleppo in 1128 and built a stronghold in Syria. Zengi's rise was significant because Aleppo gave him access to vital trade routes and military advantages. He sought to expand his rule by targeting weaker Crusader states. Unlike previous Muslim rulers, Zengi unified rival factions under his leadership. This made him a formidable opponent for the fragmented Crusader kingdoms. Zengi's growing power alarmed Christian leaders, as they realized their territories were increasingly isolated. They lacked strong support from Europe at this time. Meanwhile, disputes between local Crusader leaders further weakened their ability to respond to Zengi's threat. Edessa, being the most exposed state, became his first target. Zengi's strategic decisions and growing army positioned him as a key figure in the eventual fall of Edessa. This marked a turning point for the Crusader states. In December 1144, Zengi launched a surprise attack on the county of Edessa. His army moved quickly, while the majority of Edessa's forces were away supporting another campaign. Jocelyn II, the ruler of Edessa, had marched out with most of his troops. This left the city vulnerable to Zengi's forces, who surrounded it and began a siege. The siege lasted for about a month. Zengi used heavy pressure and persistent assaults to weaken Edessa's defenses. On December 24th, his troops successfully captured the city. Zengi's victory at Edessa shocked the Christian world. It was the first Crusader state to fall, signaling a growing threat to other territories in the region. News of Edessa's collapse spread quickly through Europe, brought back by pilgrims and envoys from the east. Christian leaders realized urgent action was needed. Zengi was celebrated across the Muslim world as a hero of Islam. He was called Defender of the Faith and gained a reputation as a strong, capable leader. Despite his victory, Zengi did not follow up by attacking nearby Crusader territories. Instead, he returned to Mosul to address political issues in his home territory. This gave the remaining Crusader states some relief, but their position was still fragile. Leaders in Jerusalem feared that Zengi might target them next. Pope Eugene III responded to Edessa's fall by issuing Quantum Predecessors, a document calling for a second crusade to reclaim the lost territory. The loss of Edessa also exposed the weaknesses of the Crusader states. Poor alliances and weak defenses made them vulnerable to further attacks. Leaders in the East requested immediate help from European kings and knights. They hoped the Second Crusade would restore their strength and security. Zengi's actions marked a turning point in the Crusades, as Muslim leaders began to unite and challenge Christian control of the Holy Land more effectively. The news of Edessa's fall alarmed Europe, and Pope Eugene III called for a Second Crusade. In December 1145, he issued the papal bull Quantum Predecessors. This document outlined the spiritual rewards for those who joined the crusade. It promised forgiveness of sins and blessings to those who participated in the holy mission. However, the initial response to the Pope's call was disappointing. Many nobles were reluctant to leave their lands and risk the challenges of such an expedition. King Louis VII of France was one of the first European rulers to support the Second Crusade. He viewed it as an opportunity to fulfill a vow made by his late brother. At first, it was unclear whether Louis was planning a pilgrimage or a military expedition. His advisors and nobles debated the wisdom of such a lengthy and risky campaign. Louis consulted Bernard of Clairvaux, a respected church leader, for guidance. Bernard strongly supported the crusade and encouraged Louis to commit to the mission. In March 1146, Pope Eugene reissued Quantum Predecessors to rally more support. He also authorized Bernard to preach the crusade throughout France. Bernard's speeches inspired many. At Vézelay, he addressed a large crowd, urging knights, nobles, and common people to join. Many pledged to fight and received the cross. Bernard's powerful message included tales of miracles and divine favor for those who joined. His words helped increase enthusiasm and participation across France. While France saw growing support, Conrad III of Germany was also preparing to join the crusade. He was persuaded by Bernard during a visit to the German court. Conrad's decision strengthened the crusade, as Germany provided thousands of troops. His nephew, Frederick Barbarossa, also joined, adding prestige to the campaign. Despite these successes, tensions arose. Some European nobles feared the crusade would drain resources, while others doubted its chances of success. The crusade also extended to Iberia, where Pope Eugene encouraged campaigns against Muslim rulers during the Reconquista. These efforts drew additional support. With armies forming in France, Germany, and Iberia, the Second Crusade became a massive effort. Yet disagreements over leadership and strategy created uncertainty. In the months leading to their departure, preparations were rushed. Supply routes, finances, and alliances were fragile, foreshadowing challenges the Crusaders would face. While the main goal of the Second Crusade was to reclaim Edessa, the crusade also spread to the Iberian Peninsula. Pope Eugene III extended its scope in 1147. He encouraged Christian rulers in Iberia to treat their campaigns against Muslim states as part of the Second Crusade. This aligned their efforts with the Reconquista. The Reconquista was an ongoing conflict in which Christian forces sought to reclaim land in Iberia that had been under Muslim rule for centuries. One of the most notable successes of the Second Crusade occurred in Portugal. A fleet of Crusaders traveling to the Holy Land stopped at the city of Porto in 1147. The Portuguese king Afonso I convinced these Crusaders to help him capture Lisbon from Muslim control. The Siege of Lisbon began in July 1147 and lasted 4 months. Hunger and isolation forced Lisbon's defenders to surrender in October 1147. The city was taken by the combined efforts of Portuguese forces and European crusaders. After the victory at Lisbon, many crusaders chose to settle in the newly captured city. Some remained in Portugal, while others continued their journey to the Holy Land. The success at Lisbon boosted morale among European Christians. It demonstrated that cooperation between local forces and crusaders could achieve significant victories. In addition to Lisbon, Portuguese forces, with help from crusaders, secured other territories such as Almada, Sintra, and Setúbal, further expanding Christian control. In northeastern Iberia, crusaders joined the forces of Count Ramon Berenguer IV of Barcelona. Their focus was on capturing Muslim strongholds in the region of Catalonia. Ramon Berenguer, with the help of crusaders and a Genoese Pisan fleet, launched a successful siege of Tortosa in 1148. The city fell after months of fighting. Tortosa's capture was followed by further advances into nearby territories, including Fraga and Lleida. These victories secured important positions along the Ebro River. The campaigns in Iberia were widely celebrated in Europe. They were seen as a triumph for Christianity, even as the main crusade in the Holy Land faced setbacks. These victories strengthened alliances between Iberian rulers and European nobles. They also laid the foundation for the eventual unification of Spain centuries later. Despite this success, the efforts in Iberia were largely separate from the central goal of the Second Crusade, which was to recover Edessa in the east. The armies of King Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany set out separately for the Holy Land in 1147. Their journey was long and filled with difficulties. Conrad's German army chose an overland route through Hungary and Byzantine territory. Despite initial progress, tensions arose with the Byzantine Empire. Emperor Manuel Farger Komnenos, the Byzantine ruler, distrusted the Crusaders. He suspected they might attack his lands instead of continuing to the Holy Land. Relations worsened when parts of Conrad's army clashed with Byzantine troops near Adrianople. These skirmishes revealed the fragile alliance between the Crusaders and Byzantium. Despite the friction, Conrad's forces reached Constantinople in September 1147. They crossed into Anatolia, where they faced fierce resistance from the Seljuk Turks. The Seljuks used ambush tactics to weaken the German army. Conrad's forces suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Dorylaeum in October 1147. Conrad's remaining troops retreated back to Constantinople. His army had been nearly destroyed, and he himself was injured in a skirmish with the Turks. Meanwhile, Louis VII's French army chose a similar route, traveling through Byzantine territory. Unlike the Germans, they experienced better treatment from Manuel IV. Manuel even provided supplies to the French army as they crossed into Anatolia. However, they also encountered fierce Turkish resistance in the mountains. The French faced heavy losses in the Battle of Mount Cadmus in early 1148. The Seljuks ambushed their forces, taking advantage of rough terrain to trap them. Louis VII narrowly escaped capture during the battle. His army continued to suffer from hunger, exhaustion, and constant harassment by Turkish archers. By the time Louis reached the port city of Attalia, much of his army had been lost. Many soldiers died from disease, while others were killed by Turkish attacks. Louis decided to sail to Antioch instead of continuing by land. However, only a small portion of his troops could afford ships, leaving many behind to march. The soldiers left behind were almost entirely destroyed by Turkish forces. The failure to protect these men highlighted the poor planning of the crusade. When Louis finally reached Antioch in March 1148, his forces were severely reduced and morale was low. The crusade had already suffered immense losses. In 1148, after regrouping in Jerusalem, Crusader leaders met at the Council of Acre. They decided to attack Damascus, a Muslim city in southern Syria. Damascus had once been an ally of the Crusader states, but had recently allied with Nur ad-Din, Zengi's son. Crusaders viewed this as a growing threat. Leaders believed capturing Damascus would strengthen Christian control and disrupt Muslim unity. However, this decision was controversial among some nobles. The Crusader armies, totaling around 50,000 troops, marched toward Damascus in July 1148. They approached the city from the west, where fertile orchards provided supplies. The initial assault on Damascus began with some success. Crusaders pushed through the orchards and reached the city walls. Spirits were high as victory seemed within reach. However, the defenders of Damascus launched fierce counterattacks. They used their knowledge of the terrain to ambush Crusaders and slow their progress. After several days, the Crusaders faced shortages of food and water. The orchards, once an advantage, became a trap as the defenders ambushed them repeatedly. On July 27th, the Crusaders decided to move their army to the eastern side of Damascus. This area had fewer defenses, but also lacked food and water sources. The change in position weakened the Crusaders. Their supplies dwindled, morale dropped, and disagreements among leaders grew. The siege was losing momentum. Meanwhile, Nur ad-Din and his forces began moving to reinforce Damascus. Their arrival made the Crusaders' position even more difficult and increased pressure to retreat. Rumors spread that some Crusader leaders were bribed by Damascus to abandon the siege. Whether true or not, the Crusaders decided to retreat on July 28th. The retreat was chaotic. The Crusaders were harassed by Muslim forces as they withdrew, suffering heavy losses. The siege ended in a disastrous defeat. The failure at Damascus created deep mistrust among Crusader leaders. Local Crusader lords felt betrayed by their European allies and criticized their poor strategy. This defeat marked the end of the Second Crusade's campaigns in the East. The Crusaders returned to Jerusalem in humiliation, their efforts having failed completely. For Muslim leaders, the victory at Damascus was a major triumph. It demonstrated their ability to resist Christian forces and bolstered their confidence for future battles. The Second Crusade ended in failure in the East. The fall of Edessa was not reversed, and the failed siege of Damascus weakened the Crusader states further. The loss of lives and resources damaged European morale. Many Crusaders returned home disappointed, and the trust between European and local Crusader leaders was broken. Pope Eugene III and Bernard of Clairvaux faced heavy criticism for promoting the crusade. Bernard, once a respected figure, struggled to defend his role in its failure. Despite the failure in the East, the Second Crusade achieved successes in Iberia. Victories such as the capture of Lisbon were celebrated as triumphs for Christianity. These campaigns strengthened Christian control in the Iberian Peninsula and boosted the Reconquista. They provided hope that future efforts could bring more success. However, these victories in Iberia were disconnected from the Crusade's main goal of protecting the Holy Land. This contrast highlighted the lack of focus in the effort. In the Muslim world, the Second Crusade strengthened leaders like Nur ad-Din. His victory at Damascus united Muslim forces and inspired confidence in their fight against Christians. Over the next decades, Muslim rulers became more organized. This unity ultimately led to the rise of Saladin, who would later retake Jerusalem in 1187. The failure of the Second Crusade encouraged Muslims to view the Crusader states as weak. This shift in perception made future conflicts more difficult for the Christians. The Crusade also worsened relations between Europe and the Byzantine Empire. European leaders blamed Emperor Manuel I for not providing enough support to the Crusaders. This mistrust deepened over time, weakening potential alliances between Western Europe and Byzantium. These divisions would have lasting consequences in future crusades. Within Europe, the crusade influenced politics and culture. Troubadours wrote about its events, blending tales of failure with stories of courtly love and honor. Ultimately, the Second Crusade revealed the limits of European power in the East. It showed that poor planning and divided leadership could lead to disaster. Despite this, the lessons learned during the Second Crusade would shape future efforts. including the more organized campaigns of the Third Crusade. The Second Crusade's legacy was one of failure in the East, but success in the West. Its outcomes set the stage for major events in the coming decades.